You know why we're all so obsessed with being busy and what happens when you stop. So, you know that feeling when you're telling your friends about your week and you almost brag about how busy you are? You know, I've just been swamped, dude, nonstop. I've barely slept. It's weird, right? Somewhere along the way, we decided that being busy is a badge of honor. If you're not constantly hustling, grinding, doing something, you must be like lazy or losing it or falling behind. I'll be honest with you. For the longest time, I thought that if I wasn't working 10 plus hours a day, I wasn't doing enough. I even used to track how many hours I spent at work, almost like it made me feel like a valuable person. You know, guess what? It didn't. It made me tired, irritable, and like kind of really miserable. You know, it's not all your fault. None of this is. We've been conditioned to think this way. And until you step out of that mindset, it's almost impossible to realize how trapped you are. Where did this whole being busy equal good thing actually come from? So, you know what? If you think about it, being busy is actually an addiction, you know, a socially acceptable one, but an addiction nonetheless. You know, back in the Industrial Revolution, people started tying their value directly towards productivity. You know, factories didn't care how you felt. They only cared about how many like widgets you could crank out in a shift. That thinking has trickled down for generations. Fast forward to today, and we're still kind of acting like machines. Only now, instead of making widgets, we're trying to fire off emails, hop back and forth on Zoom calls, and eventually crush every little task that lands in our inbox. We feel guilty for taking a nap, for going outside, for doing anything that isn't productive. It's wild when you actually really think about it too. And that's the trap of endless work. So here's the part that hits the hardest. Most of us aren't even moving the needle with all this busyness. We think if we're busy, it must be because we're accomplishing something important. But a lot of the time, we're just spinning our wheels. Imagine you're trying to build a sandcastle and you're stuck running laps around the beach instead of actually sitting down and shaping the sand. You know, you feel exhausted from running, but the castle, it's still just a pile of sand. You know, that's what happens when we confuse motion for progress. You know, for me, it really hit home when I was trying to get my own side project, Blakebill, off the ground. In the beginning, I treated it like every other job I had. There was 12-hour days, there was like endless to-do lists, checking off every box just to make it feel like I was working hard. And you know what? It really didn't. It didn't move the needle. I was too busy tweaking colors on the website, fiddling with logos, writing and rewriting button tests, basically doing everything except the one thing that actually mattered, which was getting clients. You know, when I finally slowed down and took a breath and asked myself, what's the one thing that really matters now? That's when I started to focus on building actual relationships with freelancers. You know, running small experiments, asking for feedback, and then the site started growing. Not because I was busier, but because I was actually doing less of the pointless stuff. But why busy feels so good, but actually isn't? And here's the hard truth. Being busy gives you this little dopamine hit. You know, every time you check something off your list, even if it's small and meaningless, your brain's like, good job, champ. And it feels good to be in motion. That's why you can spend a whole day answering emails and think, wow, I really crushed it today, even though you really didn't actually do anything accomplishing. It's a feedback loop. You do a tiny thing, you feel good, you crave doing more of those things. Problem is that big, meaningful work, the stuff that actually changes your life, it doesn't fit neatly into that loop. It's messy, it's slow, it often feels like nothing's happening for days, weeks, and sometimes even months. And if you're addicted to the feeling of checking off things off your list, you're going to sabotage yourself every time you try to work on something bigger. It's one thing to know that you can't out hustle a broken system. If being busy really worked, wouldn't more people be wildly successful? But look around. People are exhausted. People are burnt out, frustrated. A lot of them still don't have the life that they actually want. Working harder at the wrong thing is like running faster on a treadmill and wondering why you're not getting anywhere. It doesn't matter how much effort you put in if the system itself is broken. Again, that was a big wake-up call for me, especially with Blakebill. I could have spent 80 hours a week grinding and still ended up with nothing to show for it. Because success wasn't about how much time I spent, it was about whether I was focused on the right things. Again, if you're curious about Blakebill, it turned out to be these things like setting up super small onboardings, making sure payments worked flawlessly, and giving users this peace of mind about security, not tweaking the button color for the millionth time. Real productivity is boring. You know what's funny? The most productive people I know, the ones that actually get stuff done, they live really boring, almost monk-like work lives. They aren't grinding all day. They aren't posting hashtag hustle selfies at 11 p.m. Pick a small handful of important things. They do those things carefully, thoughtfully, and consistently. Then they go live their actual lives. There's no drama, there's no busyness, just a quiet, almost boring focus. And at first, it feels wrong, like you're not doing enough. But over time, you start to realize that this is what real work actually feels like. The myth of the 80-hour work week, you hear stories about the founders working 80, 90, even 100 hours a week. And sure, there might be tiny sprints where that's true, but nobody actually sustains that. Not without massive cracks showing up somewhere in their health, in their relationships, and even their sanity. The idea that you have to work that much to succeed is actually a myth. It's one of those lies that sounds noble, but on the surface, it actually keeps you stuck. What really matters isn't how many hours you actually work, it's what you focus on during those few hours and how you actually show up. It's a quality over quantity, it's smart over hard, focus over frantic. So what should you actually do? So here is where I could give you this neat little 5-step checklist or productivity hack, but honestly, it's simpler and harder than you actually think. Decide on what you actually want, not what you think you should want, not what looks cool on LinkedIn, what you actually want. Pick the smallest possible actions that move you forward, not busy work, not distractions, real movement. Work on those actions with full focus. No half-assing, no fake work. And stop when you're done. Seriously, close the laptop, go outside, go hug a dog, just be a person. And that's it. That's really the whole playbook. So for Blakebill, that meant cutting away everything that wasn't about onboarding users and making payments as frictionless as possible. You know, it wasn't sexy, it wasn't always fun, but it actually worked. This is the real flex of freedom. At the end of the day, you know what's cooler than being busy? Like being free. Free to wake up when you want, free to say yes to the projects that excite you and not the ones that actually drain you. Free to spend the whole afternoon hiking or hanging out with your family and not feeling guilty. Free to know that you're building something meaningful without burning yourself into the ground. And that's the real flex. Not how many hours you work, but how intentionally you live. So final thoughts on this. If you're feeling trapped in that busy loop right now, you don't need to beat yourself up. We all fall into it. I catch myself doing it sometimes too. I think the important thing is recognizing it for what it is, a trap. Owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't have to earn your worth through burnout. You're allowed to choose a different path, one that where really less is more. It really is scary at first, and it'll feel wrong. You'll be tempted to fill your calendar back up just to feel productive again. But if you can stick with it and you can trust yourself enough to slow down, you'll be amazed about how much you actually build. And you know what? Who knows? You'll maybe even launch your own thing like Blakebill. And you'll realize that success has nothing to do with how many hours you grind. It's everything to do with how you show up.